of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. Oh, there's our audience.
Good.
I was going to say, we have an audience. I know we do.
First item on the agenda is request for continuance under a hearing for notice of intent, Town of Falmouth Water Quality Management Committee, care of Stephen Rafferty, Little Pond Estuary in the west end of Narragansett Avenue, East Falmouth, for permission access Little Pond at the west end of Narragansett Avenue to cultivate oysters using floating bags, maximum of 2,000 floating bags or 20 strings of 100 bags, as part of shellfish propagation demonstration project. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until March 20th. They're providing a little bit more information for the board.
So
Okay.
moved. Second.
Any questions? Any questions from the audience? I'll call you part of the audience, too. Sure. Okay, motion on the table is for continuance to March 20th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Minutes, January 23rd.
Got 30, 20, January 3rd.
Okay, we'll postpone January 23rd to next week. Courtney, would you like to speak about January 30th?
I reviewed them and they seem in order. I'll move to adopt.
Second.
Any questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table?
We'll see Mike. Aye.
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 All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Request for determination of applicability. C.H. Newton Builders, 217 Clinton Avenue, Falmouth, for permission to replace two existing piles and the temporary dismantling and reconstruction of a wharf superstructure affected by pile replacement.
I'm
You
going
have
to
to recuse
recuse
yourself?
myself.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the
Don't
staff
go too
has
far.
reviewed the project. We're recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries now confirmed. So moved.
Second.
Any questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? Oh, do you have a question, sir? No? Okay. Motion on the table is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination, which means the people can go ahead as they've discussed with staff. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. John and Barbara Griffin, he's back. John and Barbara Griffin,
Thank you.
you're welcome. 208 Edgewater Drive East, East Falmouth, for permission to pump, fill, and abandon the existing cesspool and install a new Title V sewage disposal system.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff has reviewed the project. We are recommending a -2 under the bylaw and -3 under the state with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Continued request for...
Hi, John.
Continued requests for determination of applicability. Marine Biological Lab, 379 Oyster Pond Road, Woods Hole, for permission to pump, fill, and abandon two cesspools for cottages number 13 and number 14, and to install a new Title V sewage disposal system with leaching trenches.
Yes, Madam Chairman, we've reviewed the project, and we are recommending a -2 under the bylaw and -3 under the state with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thomas and Doreen Kinder, 123 Chester Street, North Falmouth, for permission to reconfigure the existing driveway using pavers, reconstruct the landscape retaining wall, remove steps, ornamental invasive plants, and install native plants.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the staff has met with the applicant and their contractors, and we are recommending a -2 under the state and the bylaw with the resource area boundaries not confirmed.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is to accept staff's recommendation of a negative determination. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Request for hearings under a notice of intent, Town of Falmouth Water Quality Management Committee. This is for the Little Pond project, and that's continued to March 20th. Other business. Okay, Ed, when you were gone, we started, but we've only just started, a discussion on land subject to coastal storm flowage, FWR 10.38, and procedure section, FWR 10.05.
Okay.
And with two things, we've started two things. One is Jen and I have started to look at some of the other towns' regulations to see if we can get any good ideas. And the other, Jen, do you want to report on the FEMA?
Oh, yeah, I've been in contact, I think most of you remember the last time we began to discuss this, there was a suggestion made by one of the engineers for contact at FEMA. Contacted them, spoken to them, and I've also been in contact with DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they have staff on site that helps towns craft bylaws and regulations so that we're in accordance with FEMA standards and the flood maps. So I've done that. I'll be reaching out to the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program. They're reaching out to all the towns within the Buzzards Bay watershed, looking for towns that need help with regulations. So I'll be contacting them. And I've just been going through the procedure section and editing that
Okay, so
right now to
maybe
look at that.
in a month or so?
Develop the checklist. That's pretty much almost complete, but we have to write that in. And we're just working through it, going through the edits, and then, but we'll have to start having a real discussion on the land subject to coastal storm flowage regs, probably within the next month or so.
Okay, in particular, I think, I don't know that the A zone is going to change that much. We conform with building that you have to be a foot above or 2 feet above the flood level. But the V zone potentially could change. We always have this discussion about what does the 200 square feet mean? It came in because of building, and then once you go up, well, a velocity zone is 3-dimensional. So be thinking about what happens if somebody's rebuilding in a velocity zone. That's in particular what has caused a lot of angst among the board. So I think, like, within a month, we should set aside an hour, see how people think. I know some of the engineers, I've seen them on the street, they know we're doing this, and, they have some thoughts too. So get some thoughts out on the table, and then put it in some language that we can then discuss. Okay?
Sounds good.
How about April 3rd to revisit this?
Okay, that sounds good. So everybody think and have some idea of, the range could be, and I'm not saying we would do any of these ranges, but the range could be, there could be no rebuilding in a velocity zone to, what do we mean by this 200 square feet? How does that figure in? Something like that. So, there's a wide range of things we could do.
I would add that certainly down in the New York, New Jersey area, all of the talk these days is about elevating. All the structures being elevated.
Right,
And
and
the
of
dramatic
course,
changes
of course, here, we do have to do that for
Skylines.
building. Here, we do have to do it for building, but,
Yeah, but they're getting a much more serious down there.
right.
Actually,
Well,
there's
if
a
you
place
have
in
any-
New Jersey, they're talking about elevating the entire landform of the central part of the town, and actually even bringing in fill to raise the ground level of the town and then add structures on top of that.
So they'll just divert the floodwaters to someone else,
Yes.
Right.
to a surrounding community.
But nevertheless, even if you have come across some articles like that, let's start compiling, sort of a library of different ideas that people have. Okay. Of
Yeah,
course,
just-
I'm
just-
sorry.
For those of you who are sort of new in this discussion, the 200-foot thing revolves around the difference between what the building department deals with the 200 feet is what we do, and we have the commission has an absolute prohibition on anything more than 200 feet, expansion of velocity zone, whereas the building code, and Tom, you can second this, the building code says, at least as I recall, that if someone is remodeling or building in the velocity zone, and they have an addition that is in excess of 200 square feet more, then the entire structure has to be brought into compliance with the flood zone, which means if the structure itself is down at 1 foot above grade and it's 14 feet is the velocity zone, then the entire structure has to be elevated.
Right.
Whereas what we're saying is, we're just saying, if you expand more than, you can't expand more than 200 feet. So that's the rub, and that's what we need to consider going forward.
Right, and the other thing is, even if you do go up, you're still having a lot of material there in the velocity zone, even though it is on pilings, and right now, our regulations say that it's open pilings so that water can go through. But those pilings are in sand, and depending on how much water moves through, that sand can move away and that whole
Right.
structure can fall over.
Yeah,
So-
it's not a straight and simple yes or no answer, but.
Right,
but
right.
I
So
mean,
we have to,
I'm
we have
just
to
trying
come with
get
something that's
yeah.
reasonable and fair
Yeah.
throughout the town. Okay, vote orders of conditions. Robert and Sandra Dolan, 78 Mayflower Street, East Falmouth.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the board reviewed this last week. This is just a deck addition with, on the property. Yes, I do. Michelle, Mike, Tom, Tommy, and Courtney. The question the applicant have, and this was discussed at the hearing, is whether or not the 500 square feet of native mitigation plantings required for the project to move forward under your regulations, if that could be put within the road layout of Great Bay Street. And the board had a discussion, and I think is uncomfortable with that. In the past, this board has required all mitigation plantings for a resident's property to be placed on their own property, on the legal property, and not within a town-owned road, a private paper road or anything like that. So the staff would recommend that you hold that course and require the plantings to be placed on the applicant's property. I mean, I understand what they're saying, where they're putting them, there's gonna be grass in between the mitigation plantings and the road, but that's just because people, particularly along Great Bay Street, have manicured into the road, the town-owned layout. So,
Motion to accept order as discussed.
Second,
with the plantings on their own
on
property.
your own
Yes.
property,
Okay.
that has to be that.
I mean, I
And
think
that was
that
the only thing.
if they got permission from the town to also plant in that area, it just can't be counted as mitigation.
No, if they wanted
Yeah.
to supplement that within the town road layout and receive proper permission, that's fine, but it cannot be counted towards mitigation because we don't know if they'll be removed at any point in the future.
Okay?
Correct.
Okay, all,
Just a
Yeah.
point of order here. I suppose, in a theoretical situation, if the town were agreed to allow the mitigation plantings and essentially be subject to the same restrictions, then I suppose we could approve it. The likelihood of that is close to none, so it's an academic, but I think it's worth observing that in some point in the future, there could be a situation where the town might agree to be, have that restriction placed on their own freedom of action. And, we shouldn't necessarily preclude it, but the likelihood of an owner getting that kind of agreement from the town is probably slim to none.
Do you mean an attachment that the town is now deeded to keep that mitigation that would be attached to the owner's deed?
Well,
That's what gives, that's what
if
gives.
a town, if a
That's what
town
gets money.
owns, say, a road layout, and someone wants to count their mitigation on their project,
Right,
putting mitigation plannings in the town road layout,
right.
the assumption behind our saying, no, you can't do that, is because we have no way of controlling that. In other words, if the town decided they wanted to pave the road from width to width,
Right,
and they took those mitigation plannings out, you
right.
see, they could do that. We're assuming that the town would never give that permission, so therefore, we're making it simple for everybody by saying, no, you can't plant except on your own land. But that doesn't mean if somebody had tremendous powers of persuasion to convince the town to agree in perpetuity that they would never touch those mitigation plannings.
Right.
Well, I suppose we could then write an order of conditions that had that condition in there and make the town a party to it.
We have a motion and a second on the table. I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of the motion on the table, which is to accept the order as read and discuss that the mitigation plannings go on the people's land who want to modify their structure. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Now I'm going to weigh in and say there's no way you can guarantee the town is not going to do that, and you can't put it on
Oh,
This
no, I
person's
wouldn't put it in an order of
property.
conditions.
What- What Michelle said is correct. If people want to have additional plannings, they want to pay, they can ask the town, and the town can accept those plantings, which would better protect the resource, but the town has the right to modify that if,
And the other fact of the matter is that the town, even if they agreed to it down the road, could take it by eminent domain.
right, so it's not, it wouldn't be a good practice.
No, it would not.
They would
Okay,
still have to come before us.
vote enforcement order, John Powers, trustee in Collins, irrevocable property trust, care of Webster Collins, 87 Garnett Avenue, North Falmouth. Jen?
Oh, I added that. Hang on, Susan's catching up. Yes, Madam Chairman, this is a enforcement hearing that was held last week. The board remembers it was at 87 Garnet Ave, and there had been alterations to resource areas on site. We went out, on the next day, had them installed silt fencing and hay bale lines to prevent any erosion from going down into the isolated land subject to flooding. We're still not quite sure where that boundary is. The engineer needs to do some calculations to figure that out. But we have drafted an enforcement order for the board. I think one of the important findings is the jurisdiction, which is isolated land subject to flooding under your bylaw and under the act, but also the 100-foot resource area buffer around isolated land subject to flooding under your bylaw is a jurisdictional resource area. So keep that in mind. So not only did they alter the actual isolated land subject to flooding, but that resource area buffer, which is considered a resource area in your bylaw, was also highly disturbed. We're not quite sure the number of trees that were taken down. That will be looked at when this process goes further. We are recommending that the board vote in order that they, one, cease all activity out there that is altering the wetland, they stabilize the property, and pull the fill out from the banking, that they submit a notice of intent to this board within 30 days. That notice of intent would include a site plan with all of the resource areas under the act and the bylaw delineated. They'll need to seek approval for the structure that was built without the commission's, without a permit from the commission or a building permit. That structure appeared around the late 80s, 89. They had originally proposed to come in for a new structure. We've asked them to rethink that until they restore the property, but that might be part of the notice of intent. And that is the notice would be to either approve the structure that was built without a permit, either to allow it to remain or be removed. That's a discussion the board's going to have. And also to submit a restoration plan for these resource areas that have been altered, including, a number of trees will need to be replanted, a shrub layer will need to be replanted. There was a lot of earthwork on that site. It appears that they took a small banking and removed it in order to flatten the land to build what they had come for in January under the building permit, which prompted all of this. So there was a tremendous amount of earthwork done on the site that needs to be corrected. I know that the applicant had asked for additional time beyond that 30 days. That's a discussion this board is going to have.
Okay, so I think there are,
There'll be, sorry, Madam Chair, there'll be, one more thing, there'll be a monitoring plan. The order will have to have all the resource areas staked, just like a regular notice of intent, all the requirements. And because it's an enforcement issue, a 3-year monitoring plan for this work.
okay, Court?
We're issuing an order and asking them to submit an order of conditions for
A notice
the
of intent.
correction.
A
the
notice of
work.
intent.
A notice of intent.
A notice of intent. Now, I think that should be made clear in the enforcement order since it was raised in the last meeting, what the definition of restoration is. Because if we're going to ask them to submit an order of conditions, then in that order of conditions, they've got to define the restoration that they're going to do. My recommendation would be that the restoration is that they restore the landform to its original contour that existed prior to their current degrading. Okay?
And the vegetation.
And the vegetation, but they should restore the contour.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so as long as we understand that, that's clear.
Yeah, there was some, I agree with you, there was some miscommunication and some knee-jerk statements about, going back to the Mayflower and,
Yeah,
there were no
right.
trees and all that. What we're doing is when they, in January, disrupted this earth and pushed it towards the resource, at that point, when they start to pull this stuff back, I also had gone to the site. It's going to be very evident because they did not strip the slope that they pushed this material over was pretty heavily vegetated, so when they pull the material back, they'll be able to tell the contour pretty easily. And there's also some very large stumps. During this, as they pull this material back, they'll be able to see how many stumps. There's at least 2 that were very visible and good size. And that's going to also be an indicator of that contour. And as they come back, it was told to be a cart path, so that's got a hard base to it. So that's going to be very recognizable as that goes along. So I think that the restoration, as you said, pulling it back to that contour should be very easy to see and to designate.
That's
But
good.
also, there's been a lot of disturbance all around.
That's what I was going to say. We need to be careful referencing their work in January, because
Yes.
it's my understanding there's been cuttings occurring before that.
Correct. There's been a lot of work, not just in the area where the earthwork occurred,
Yes.
but all along and within those resource areas, there's been a lot of disturbance, and that is very evident. We have aerial photos we can go off of as far as the trees concerned, but also there has been, clear disturbance in the resource areas as far as removing vegetation. So we'd like to just see a full restoration plan of those jurisdictional resource
Yeah.
areas
I think
for this board.
what I'm getting at, is that if there's additional work that requires restoration beyond what Tom and I were discussing, I think that all of that has to be very clearly spelled out So there's no ambiguity about what it is we're looking for in a notice.
And if I could jump back in briefly, one of the things that's going to weigh into that is knowing the exact size of the resource, because we don't have it. It is a substantially large area. It's a
Yeah.
big footprint of standing water, and that's not just the only determining factor. So
Yeah.
when they do start pulling that, and we can uncover other vegetation and other indicators, that line may jump back even further.
Absolutely. In order to fully review this, we'll need to do a lot of investigation on site, and that can be done after the notice of intent is filed. For restoration would be a full shrub and tree restoration plan of those jurisdictional resource areas.
Okay, is there anything else?
So
Michelle?
will the enforcement order require that they have a wetlands scientist out there determining the resource?
Yes, we've asked that, and I think we discussed that at the last hearing as well. We stressed to them the need to hire a wetlands professional to go out there and evaluate the area, to work with their engineer to develop this, review the site, and determine what happened out there and what should be done to restore it. And I think the board made that I know the staff made that very clear to them at last week's hearing.
Court?
Let Mike go
Oh,
first.
Mike?
Has the site been stabilized? Understood.
Yes, well, they installed a silt fence line and the straw bales, I was told, were placed on the site. I was given a call yesterday morning that they were placed on the site yesterday. They were going to arrive on the site. We'll go out and check tomorrow.
Well, you were there, was there evidence of erosion that was apparent to you?
It will be tomorrow.
They had moved a whole bunch of, as I said, the earthwork, cascaded all that over the slope.
You know,
It goes down, it does flatten out. That's where we had them install the silt fence and the
Okay.
hay bales. Hopefully that'll hold it.
They did have a berm at the top.
Yeah,
And when they first did it and they leveled off, there's a slight berm of 8-10 inches. Then it cascades over the slope and hits the break in the slope again. And what it did was the material was not real sandy. It was gravelly, clay-ish type of material, and it's through the vegetation. It hadn't slumped. It did not migrate into the
No,
fines
it
had not
hadn't
migrated
migrated
past that.
into the-
And it would take, if they have
the standing
siltation
water.
fence at the bottom in the hay bales, it would take an extreme event to
The one that's
to make
supposed to
that-
hit tonight?
No, I'd say
Like
even
tonight.
more so,
No,
because
even more so.
it does slope, and if that's properly installed, that berm at the top contains quite a bit, and it does run away from it at this point in time.
I've seen a lot of silt fences and straw bales fail.
And
Absolutely.
not saying
and
that
it's
it
something
couldn't,
we'll have to check.
not
you know,
saying that it
next week.
couldn't, but it wasn't,
Yeah,
indicators if it's properly installed, it should be able to handle quite a bit.
Court?
Yeah,
Are you done?
on that subject, I'd be personally a lot more comfortable to have them right away pull that bank back and build up a much larger berm, but pull that bank back so that where trees have been, I saw pictures that showed the fill going around the trunks of the trees part way up, and if that was allowed to remain, it would kill the trees. So I'd like to see that all pulled back a few feet and bermed, and the hay bale line made as secure as possible right away. Let's not wait for order of conditions and
Well, the
Notice
stabilization,
of intent.
notice of intent and order of conditions to
I think
do
the
that.
stabilization is what's gonna prevent any further. Once you start pulling that material, you're gonna start doing, that's when you should be going to the contour. At that point, once you
Right.
start, and I would not be in favor of doing any earthwork till you're at the point where you can continue it. Once you start it, you continue it out to the
That's a
original
good
grade.
point, though. Yeah. I'll defer to that.
Any other?
Yeah, my other comment is on the unpermitted barn, which is not permitted either by this commission or by the town building department.
We cannot find a building permit.
Okay, and I think we should be mindful of a similar situation, I believe it was on Bacon Farm Road in East Falmouth, off of Davisville, where a house was taken over by a bank, and in the time, somewhere in, prior to the bank taking it over, there had been additions on there without the benefit of a building permit or conservation. And we and the town both agreed that those structures should come off. So I think that's a good operational precedent in this particular situation we face now. And it might be that maybe a requirement in that notice of intent is to get some kind of written opinion from Eladio Gore, how the building department views an unpermitted structure being allowed to remain.
Okay, I'm not going to comment on this project, but I'm going to just say in general, I'm sure Jen's going to be working with them when they're doing the notice of intent. And she would, I'm sure will remind them that any needed permit needs to be applied for before they submit a notice of intent.
Good point.
Mike?
The applicant provided information that suggested that could be a vernal pool. When you were there, were there evidence of that being true?
It's very early in the season, Mike. That's something we'd have to reevaluate end of this month, early April.
Do you need time to see that that happens?
I think when the notice of intent is issued, we'll go out there and evaluate the site for the correct resource areas. Like I said, we're going on an old, right now, you know, when we say jurisdictional resource areas, I think it was also made clear in the hearing that there could be additional resource areas out there that this commission is unaware of at this time. It's possible, and it's something that the staff will look at when, at a more appropriate time of year, which is the end of this month.
Mike, the definition of a vernal pool is biological,
I understand.
and the,
It also has to
The
do
little
with
critters-
hydraulics. So
Yes,
it's-
Right.
absolutely.
It's a combination of both, and I'm,
but it has to, without the
It's quite
biological,
possible, Mike.
without the
I-
biological part,
well, that's
it
going to
doesn't
lead
matter
to
what
a
the
next
hydraulics
discussion,
are.
so I'm right on board.
Right,
And
Right.
that's something that when.
and those critters are getting ready to
Do their thing.
do their thing.
And when a notice of intent is submitted to this board for review, we will make sure that all resource areas are included at that time.
Good. Court.
Mike, are you referring to the testimony that we heard? It wasn't from the owner, but
Brother-in-law.
I believe the testimony that he gave was that, he said this land is never flooded. And he said, he reminded us that this was actually part of what was called a geologic formation called the Sagamore Lens, which means that essentially that depression goes up and down with the groundwater. And so if a lot of rain comes, of course, that's a way for it to get absorbed in the groundwater. What would strike me is that if that in fact is true, that even makes it even more of a wetland than,
Evidence was presented, and
Yeah.
I'll take it where I find
and
it.
if that's the
Absolutely.
case,
Absolutely.
that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
And I
Yes, it
think
is.
it's important for this board to understand that, you know, based on the information we have, it's within your jurisdiction. And I'll stress that there could be additional resource areas out there.
And then we'll find out within the next
and-
month.
Yes.
All set?
And I think that was
We
made
want-
very clear at the hearing as well.
Should we have a motion on the table? Ed and
think I
can't
already did.
participate, but you have a motion? Do we have a motion in a second,
don't?
Susan?
Oh, never mind. I
Well,
will
you
make a
could-
motion.
And I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the table to accept this enforcement order as read and discussed. Any further questions? Mike?
I'd like to amend it so that we give the applicant 60 days to be sure he addresses the applicant, the conditions as they are in the spring.
Is it 60 or 30?
We had recommended 30. I know they had asked for additional time. I would say that's fine, but this board might want to place an order in the enforcement order that, even prior to the notice of intent being filed, that the staff meet out there with their representatives to evaluate these resource areas, end of March, early April, when we could potentially see evidence of another resource area on site and go through the process that we're allowed to access the property.
Those of you, any discussion or?
Along with your amendment,
You could make it 45 days.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I'd be more
I would be
comfortable
more
with that.
comfortable with 45 days.
That was my question, was just, is 30 enough for them to get everything together?
They have the base work done. I mean, Jack does still have a lot of work to do. They have to contract with a wetland professional. 30 days is tight. 45 is a little bit more lenient. They are aware of this. They were aware of this last week. They were told to start contacting appropriate professionals to help them.
Jack was told 30 last week, or
I
45?
I will defer to my friends here, but one, the sins were committed in the past. We put everything in place to be sure that it's stabilized, it's proceeding right. We're making sure that our staff is there to be sure that all the resort areas are there. If they find conditions on April 4th, to pick April 1st might be a more appropriate date to find something, that they have time to respond. I just, as long as it's moving forward, what I want is, there was a sin in the past and I want to correct it in the future. And some time in the middle here to be sure it's done right doesn't, I'm comfortable with that, but I will do, if 45 feels better.
Have them file it, if you're holding on the 60 days, you could have them file it by May 1st. But that's up to the board.
I'm inclined to, I understand where you're coming from, Mike, and I actually agree with that. But I think if we hold to the 45 with the proviso that we can always extend that if they show good cause, okay? Or we discover other resources that change the conditions. But we start out with 60, it'll be 75. If we start out with 45, it'll be 60, which is what we're aiming at. And as long as as long as they know that, or as long as we're clear that, if there's circumstances that require an extension on that, we're open to, we gotta hear why.
You're 45, what are you?
I mean, under that reasoning, I think 30 is fine.
What are you?
I'm at 30.
45.
60.
Okay, the
230s.
average of those is 45.
Yeah.
Let's,
I like
let's move
45.
on. Let's not
Okay.
spend an hour.
Yep. Not a problem. So that's the motion with
Okay,
the
so the-
45?
Yep, so Susan, motion on the table is to accept the enforcement order as discussed with a 45-day time for the notice of intent to be filed.
With the
And-
findings and the orders that the requirements for the notice of intent and for staff to be allowed on site.
Correct. All
Early
those-
spring,
Yeah,
early
staff,
April.
staff be on site, staff consult with what has to be in that notice of intent, including the restoration plan.
Betsy, spoken with the wisdom of Solomon.
Okay, motion on the table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous, so moved. Ed, would you like to do a motion to
I
adjourn?
propose we adjourn and make that motion.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Any discussion from the audience? Okay, there's a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I-
Unanimous,
I'm
so
gonna-
moved.
I'm gonna start signing.